Every human, animal, plant, even bacterium shares something that no AI has. And I'm not talking about biological materials or quantum effects or anything exotic. It's something far more fundamental. AI is not alive. See, being alive creates a special kind of intelligence, living intelligence. And it's not just one thing, it's built from 4 interweaving layers. Prominent AI researchers like Yann LeCun argue that current AI has barely cleared the first one. That's why, no matter how massive these AI models get, they still hallucinate, still struggle to be original, and still fail at questions that even a 5-year-old can answer. Like this one. Yesterday, you bought 5 apples from the grocery store. Today, you bought 10 more, but 5 of them turn out to be rotten. How many apples have you bought so far? The answer is 15. 5 yesterday, 10 today. The rotten ones are irrelevant. Rotten or not, they're still apples. But for years, AI models like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini would sometimes answer 10. Why is that? The problem lies in the brain behind modern AI, the large language model, or LLM. LLM learns by reading an enormous amount of human text and maps out statistical patterns, which words tends to follow other words. When you ask LLM a question, it doesn't really answer it. Instead, it generates the most likely text that would come next. A lot of time, this works really well, but sometimes it fails completely. In most math textbooks, when you mention 15 of something and then say 5 of them are rotten, the question is usually asking you to subtract. So an LLM that has read thousands of these problems learns if it sees a big number, then a small number, then rotten, it should use subtraction, even when the actual question is asking something different. Now, this specific bug has been mostly patched. Newer AI models route math problems to dedicated tools like Python, but that only treats the symptom. The underlying problem is still there. LLMs produce the most likely answer, not necessarily the correct one. And the problem doesn't stop there. An LLM can memorize words like apple and rotten, but it doesn't understand what they actually mean in the real world. For all we know, it might think rotten apples are not apples because it has never held an apple or smelled one rotting. Everything it knows it learned from our texts, which are all second-hand descriptions. But we learn from first-hand experiences. Before a baby can even understand the word apple, the brain is already building an internal map through sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, so that when they finally learn the word, it clicks into place. It's grounded in something real. Even bacteria do this. They don't have eyes or ears, but they have thousands of chemical receptors, constantly mapping the molecules around them. Which way has more food, which way has more toxin. Neuroscientists and AI researchers have a name for this: world modeling. And it's the foundational layer of living intelligence. A world model is like a simulation in your head. It lets you make predictions, even when you don't have all the information, because it can fill in the gaps. You don't need a math problem to tell you that rotten apples are still apples. You've lived it, so that's what your world model assumes. Now, LLMs have world models too, but they're built from language alone, and language, for all its richness, still leaves out an enormous amount of information. Think about color. We have maybe a few dozen words to describe it, but our eyes can distinguish around 1 million shades, more than the number of entries in the English dictionary. And that's just the difference we can count. For something like balance, our language fails completely. You can read all the books in the world about how to ride a bike, and you still won't know what it feels like to balance on one. Without first-hand sensory information, LLMs are stuck building war models that are skewed and incomplete. That's why they still produce absurd answers that many humans would catch with common sense. So we just need to give AI eyes and ears, and it will be as intelligent as us, right? Well, that's the idea behind Yann LeCun's JEPA approach, training AI to build a world model by watching millions of hours of video. So far, the result seems promising, but it's still missing something crucial. Imagine you are an AI that's modeling the world through videos. One day, you saw a statue through a security camera across a park. From that angle, it looks like a perfect square, so you predict it could be a cube. But it could also be a pyramid, a diamond, or something you've never seen before. You can wait for someone to turn the statue for you so that you can see the other sides, but that will probably never happen, leaving you with an incomplete world model. You might think this is absurd, because if a human saw this statue, they could just walk around it to check whether it's a cube or not. But this simple act is exactly what LLMs lack: the second layer of living intelligence, active interaction. See, when you only learn from passive sensory data like texts or even videos, you get whatever information that happens to be available. It's often not enough to build a complete model of anything. But when you can interact with the world, you don't need to wait for more information. You can seek it out, walk around, move things with your hands, or ask questions instead of listening passively. Again, all living things interact with the world in some ways, because it's a more efficient and thorough way of building war models. But that's not all. There is an even deeper reason why active interaction is so important. Consider this: drowning incidents at public pools tend to rise during the same weeks that ice cream sales spike. Obviously, it'd be wrong to conclude that more ice cream sales leads to more drownings. Correlation doesn't mean causation. But how do you actually prove that? Well, by interacting with the variables. You look at towns where ice cream shops went out of business, and you see that drowning incidents still went up at around the same time. So you keep isolating different variables until you find the real cause, the weather. Hotter weather leads to more ice cream sales and more drowning, while colder weather leads to less. This is exactly how the scientific method works. By changing things and observing the result, you're not just memorizing patterns, you're mapping out the causes, the underlying mechanisms that the world actually runs on. And a causal world model is far more powerful than a correlational one. It lets you generalize. When you understand why hot weather causes more drowning, you can also predict that it might cause more air-conditioned sales and power outages, even if you've never seen such data before. LLMs, on the other hand, struggle to generalize beyond their training data because their world models are shallow. For years, much of their causal reasoning is just memorization, or worse, labeling whatever comes first as the cause. Newer models have improved, again by using external tools, but the improvement is uneven. They handle textbook-style questions well, but still stumble over real-world problems.
I'm gonna let go with my right hand, okay? What do you expect to happen?
I'm ready. When you let go, I expect the pin to rotate downward, pivoting around the end you're still holding.
Okay,
So let's see.
What just happened?
I saw the pin rotate exactly as expected. When you let go, it pivoted down around the point you were still holding.
This is also why LLMs struggle to create something truly original, because they can't touch the world, they can't experiment. Now, I'm not saying no AI has ever been original. AlphaGo famously invented Move 37 in a match against world champion Lee Sedol, a move no human had played before in Go history. But that was possible precisely because AlphaGo works very differently from an LLM. It learns by playing millions of games against itself. In other words, it experiments in the Go world. So we just need to give LLMs arms and legs so that they can interact with the world, right? Not even close. You see, for AlphaGo, the objective is clear. Control more territory than your opponent on a 19 by 19 board. Sure, there are a lot of possible moves, but the rules are fixed, the board is finite, and everything happens inside a computer at lightning speed. The real world is nothing like this. It's got infinitely more possible actions, more dimensions, more variables, and every interaction happens in real time. You can't speed up gravity or fast forward a conversation. So an AI with a body dropped into the real world faces an impossible question. Where do I even start? Random interaction won't cut it because that'll take lifetimes. The AI needs something to guide its action, a compass, and crucially, it needs to come from within, not from a human specifying every objective in every situation, because that's logistically impossible. And you've guessed it, that compass is our third layer of living intelligence, intrinsic drives. Let's go back to our statue example to see how this works. Remember, you start from one side, which looks like a square, so you predict it's a cube. Now you want to check, but notice you don't just walk randomly. You don't go backwards, you don't spin in circles, you walk to the side, because that's the angle most likely to confirm or reject your prediction. You did this without even thinking, because your brain instinctively wants to close the gap between what it expects and what it experiences, a drive to minimize prediction error. In the groundbreaking book, Active Inference, neuroscientist Carl Friston argues that this drive is fundamental to all life. It's why you often see kittens, puppies, and babies staring at things and bobbing their heads around. Because many animals are born with blurry visions. This drive guides them to move in ways that sharpen their senses and world models. But while minimizing prediction error is essential, it can also become a trap if it's the only drive. Picture a bacterium that lands on a big pile of food. Every prediction it makes is correct. Food here, food still here, so it just stays there as the food gradually runs out. That's pretty bad for long-term survival. So every organism needs a second drive, the drive to explore, to seek new information even when the current model says nothing interesting is out there. Because it's a good idea to keep scouting where the next pile of food might be, before you need it. Again, LLMs have primitive versions of these drives. When you ask it a question, it has to decide whether to play it safe with the most probable response, or produce something novel and creative. But notice something. These two things are always pulling in opposite directions. You can't fully play it safe and be creative at the same time. In machine learning, this is called the exploit versus explore trade-off. LLMs tries to strike a balance, but it's usually done using a single knob, set by a human, held roughly constant through an entire conversation. Living organisms are doing something fundamentally different. They have to shift this balance moment to moment, because different situations call for different strategies. Running from a predator, do what worked before. Finishing a meal in a safe area, time to explore. And critically, no one is turning this knob for them. They have to turn it themselves. But it's even more complicated than that. Because living organisms have a whole suite of intrinsic drives like hunger, thirst, sleepiness, curiosity, pain avoidance, the urge to reproduce. Each is a kind of a specialized version of the first two drives, designed for a different context. Pain is your body telling you a physical prediction is dangerously off. Curiosity is your mind telling you to explore new places and learn new things. So, how does a living organism manage these competing drives and decide which to follow and when? It needs the final layer, perhaps the most important layer for intelligence, self-reflection. Newer LLMs simulate a kind of reflection. It's called thinking mode. Here's how it works. Instead of answering a question in one shot, it breaks the question into smaller steps and processes them in sequence. So if it makes a mistake at step 2, it might catch it and correct it by step 5. This does reduce hallucination on logic-heavy tasks like math and coding, but it doesn't eliminate them. In some cases, thinking longer actually produces more mistakes. Why is that? Because you're asking an LLM to check its own work using the same world model that produced the mistakes in the first place. It's like asking a hiker who's lost to try harder while using a wrong map. It's not going to get you anywhere, no matter how hard you try. What you need is a different map. Now, humans hallucinate too. Our minds generate nonsense all the time, yet we don't just speak or act on every random thought that comes through our head. Something is filtering, and that thing lives in our prefrontal cortex. But here's what makes it special. It's not running the same process with more effort. It's building something like a second-level world model. One that doesn't just model the external world, but also the internal ones. Our thoughts, our feelings, our biases. And it doesn't stop there. This second world model comes with its own interaction that tests and reshapes predictions. It also has its own intrinsic drives that operate on a longer time horizon, counterbalancing the short-term impulses of earlier drives. So it's not just one new layer of intelligence, it's 3 new layers nested into the previous 3, creating a recursive feedback loop that monitors and governs how we think and feel, with a degree of objectivity that the original layers can't achieve on their own. It's thinking about thinking, learning about learning. Neuroscientists call this metacognition, the closest thing we have to watching ourselves from a third-person perspective. And this has a fascinating implication. The 4th layer can only come online after the first 3 layers are already functioning, because you cannot reflect on a system that doesn't exist yet. For example, humans get pretty good at world modeling and active interaction by age 5. And we're essentially born with intrinsic drives, but self-reflection, that's a slow burn. Basic self-awareness shows up in early childhood, but the heavy reflections, abstract thinking, long-term planning, executive function doesn't fully mature until your mid-20s. And even after that, all 4 layers continue to refine for the rest of your life. Whereas LLMs stop learning the moment their training ends. Another implication of the 4th layer is that the recursive nesting doesn't just happen once. It can keep nesting, forming higher and higher orders of world models, emotions, and behaviors. Take empathy. It's what happens when you apply reflection to someone else's mind. You build a model of how they think about themselves. And it can go further. Build a model of how they think about how you think about yourself. When these models are aligned in a community of people, it's what creates that sense of shared understanding, trust, and solidarity. Even many single-cell organisms have feedback mechanisms that shape their behaviors over time, though they're not nearly as sophisticated as self-reflection in humans. But that does lead us to another insight. Our intelligence resides as much in our body as it does in our brain. Your senses, your muscles, even your gut, filter and shape information before it ever reaches the brain. It acts like another layer of intelligence. And if you zoom out further, our society does the same thing. Institutions model the world through discourse. Markets interact through trade. Democracies reflect through elections, adding even more layers of intelligence at a civilizational scale. It's no accident that the vast majority of progress in human history came from groups of people building on each other's work, not from lone geniuses thinking hard enough. So maybe the right question isn't how do we build AI that thinks like humans, but rather how do we build AI that becomes a new layer? One that collaborates with the society layer, the human layer, the cellular layer, amplifying our collective intelligence rather than replacing it. Amazingly, this kind of collective cooperation isn't just a human ideal. It's a pattern that emerges naturally from evolution and game theory. And it's one of the reasons why superintelligent AI likely won't be hostile to humans. If you want to understand the math behind that, check out my previous video. Also, this balance between prediction error minimization and exploration isn't just essential for intelligence. It's critical for any system like business, economics, and politics. I made a playlist that connects all of them. Lastly, if you'd like to support my work and help my team rely less on ads and sponsors, there's a Patreon link in the description. No pressure. Thank you for being here.